Hello and welcome to Mythic Mind Games, an extension of the Mythic Mind Fellowship, which pursues wisdom on the paths between primary and secondary worlds. I'm Dr. Andrew Snyder, and I'm glad that you're here. Hey there, welcome to our discussion of Final Fantasy VI. This is an incredible game, and I really appreciated having the opportunity to talk about it with these guys. Although, unfortunately, I did have to suddenly cut out of the conversation a little bit early. Our 8-month-old son suddenly started getting really sick from a food allergy that we just discovered, so I had to go help out with that. He's fine now, but that's why I suddenly dropped out of the conversation. I told the other guys, just keep going as long as you feel like going and stop whenever you want to. And so I appreciate them doing that, but obviously not ideal situation. But nonetheless, I think it was a good conversation, and I hope that you enjoy. All right, welcome back. As we now are finally continuing our Final Fantasy series, we had to skip one session of this due to my scheduling issues, but now we're back into it. Yeah, so this is a game that I do have some nostalgia for. I remember it on the SNES, although I wasn't fully equipped yet to really get into it. I was a little young at the time, but I still had enough familiarity with it that this is one that brings back all kinds of memories, the various scenes, various characters and whatnot. But now really getting into it now as an adult, like there's so much in this game, like way more than we can realistically cover in a single podcast conversation. But I do appreciate it on a very general level. We can get into the specifics later, but just these themes of self-deifying nihilism that we get in the likes of Kefka. This is where I think we go from dealing strictly with archetypal villains to really having a character who's a villain in a more profound, more particular sort of way than we've had so far. And so I really like the Kefka character, very strong connections to what's going to happen with Sephiroth, very similar motivations and character profiles. But yeah, so you get this character that because he hates meaning, he aspires for meaning, but in so doing, he ends up just sucking everything within himself. And so then our various protagonists, this large ensemble cast here of heroes, they have to go through their own encounters with despair, their own encounters with potential pathways to nihilism, but discover meaning through meaningful connections. And so there's a lot of really just dramatic, significant things happening in this story on a even deeper level than what we've seen so far. We've seen it's gotten progressively deeper and more complicated up to this point, but I feel like this is a big jumping point. But yeah, so I'd love to just hear some of your thoughts, wherever you want to go, personal experience, broad themes, kind of however you want to kick us off. Micah, what do you have for us?
Yeah. I first played Final Fantasy VI as one of my first JRPGs I ever played, way back in like the 90s at some point. Like a friend lent it to me and said, "You gotta play this game." And I was like, okay. And yeah, I remember thinking like this game is like way more fun than I expected, like as someone who didn't have a lot of experience with RPGs. And there's so many characters in it. Like when you played other RPGs, you kind of realize just how many. There's 14 playable characters, which is bonkers for the genre. And what's interesting to me is like it's really hard for me to say like if there's even like a main character per se. Like it feels like Terra for most of it, but like once you get to the back half, like it's like anybody could compete for main character other than like the two throwaway extras, like the Yeti Umaru and the Mime. Um, but yeah, like you said, Kefka is like one of the best villains I think in the series. Like he's one of my favorite villains ever. He's like I describe him to people as like the Joker with a god complex who actually becomes a god, which is like absolutely terrifying. And yeah, it deals with nihilism, like you said. It's like it's kind of mind-blowing, especially for that time. Like when you see, oh, the world actually got destroyed. Okay, well now what? The villain won. Where do we go? Um, but yeah, it's super fun. Like you can tell, Final Fantasy was really like trying to reinvent itself at this point. Like it was getting away from a lot of the very basic RPG whimsical tropes that were carried all the way up through five. And like, I love the stories of four and even five, but six is just like a whole different ball game. And you can see it's a clear inflection point where the whole series changed after that. So, really fascinating game and still, I think, super fun to play.
Yeah, well, I think we've mentioned this in some of the previous chats
Mhm.
that at least I feel like six is where Final Fantasy really got into its own,
Mhm.
where we get this. We've seen already some of this blends of like fantasy and technology and whatnot, but now that becomes more of a central theme rather than just the aesthetic, right? We're dealing with nature versus progress, or the artificial versus the natural. Maybe that's a better way to say that. And we've already seen in the last game, in five, some of these themes about misusing the earth, misusing nature. But now I feel like that again, that gets more of a, I don't know, it gets more play, more impact, more significance here. But we can get into more of that as we move on. David, I'd like to hear some of your thoughts here.
Yeah, well, I first played it right when it came out. I think it was 94, Final Fantasy 3, as they called it here on the Super Nintendo. But I have not played it since then. So I've been playing through it again on the Pixel remasters, and I still had I found my Final Fantasy 3 complete guide, like a physical book that's several hundred pages, and I've been keeping it next to me on the sofa, and I was playing it this evening, and but I only got so far as I just got Mog on my team, and I was going around and collecting his dances from the different places in the world because I know some of that is missable if I go on to when the world gets destroyed. So, um, yeah, I didn't remember a lot about the game. I hadn't noticed until I was playing it this time how close some of the themes really are to Seven, and even some of the music feels really close to the music in Seven. Um, and I had never thought about the fact that this is the first Final Fantasy game where the sprites for your characters in the overworld are exactly the same as in the combat. You know, in all the ones before this, you're a little half-height guy who's not as expressive, but in this one, they are the exact same sprites as you have in combat, and they they have that shocked animation that they use to good effect sometimes, and they even like wink and whatnot. But yeah, the number of characters is almost overly ambitious that you can have on your team. I think that may be one of the reasons I had trouble coming back to it because I get decision paralysis in a game like this because I've been having times where I'm like, I'm not sure where I'm supposed to go. The world's a little too open. And you know, you have little parts where you actually split up, which is pretty neat to have teams go in different directions and then reconnect later on. But yeah, the idea that magic is gone. Nobody alive has seen magic, and technology has kind of taken over. So it's like a big deal the first time, you know, the combat stops the first time you use magic, and everybody freaks out, which I think is pretty clever. But yeah, I've been enjoying it, but there are some rough things that happen. Cyan and his family, and you know, just all of the stuff that's going on with the Espers, right? Yeah. I always forget what they call them from game to game, but in this one, yeah, they're Espers, and the way that they're treated in their world, and Terra, and how she just kind of goes berserk um, when she comes in contact with her past. Yeah, it's pretty great. I'm looking forward to finishing it, but I'm sorry I wasn't able to pull it off before this podcast.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Cyan. He definitely has one of the heaviest arcs, the heaviest things in the game. I mean,
Yeah,
when he has to wave goodbye to his family on the ghost train, and then later on in the destroyed world where you have to deal with everyone's problems, he's like trying to kill himself, and you have to go in there and deal with the like phantoms in his mind of his dead family, and like it's super intense for a pixel RPG game. Like I was not ready for all of that when I just played through it recently. I can't imagine playing it as a kid.
right.
They do at least alleviate the ghost train thing a bit with Saban suplexing the train.
That's right.
Yes.
I have a friend who this is just his favorite game, and he told me the proper way to defeat the train is suplex it once and then just hit it with a Phoenix down because it's undead, so a Phoenix down just instantly kills it. So that's what I did, and it was fun.
Well, let's see, where should we even go with this? I mean, on the broad thematic level of, magic, for example, it is interesting that the magic has basically been gone from the world. It was eradicated in ages past through this great war that happened. But now it's this evil technological empire that is more or less bringing it back, but in the wrong sort of way, right? They're bringing it back through oppression, through a closed hand rather than the open hand that magic is supposed to be received with. And so I feel like there's something there. I haven't fully worked it out. Something about, looking back to the ancients, but in the wrong sort of way. Instead of recognizing the heritage we've been given, it's a matter of, how can we use that for ourselves? I don't know. There's something there. I haven't fully worked it out.
Yeah, and it's exploitation of this whole race as a resource. Kefka is just like, well, I've drained all the energy out of you and just kicks them down into a hole. Like he has no concern for this sentient being that he's just harvesting for their ability. And I'm sure it gets more overtly environmental in seven, but I can feel the same sort of a thing here in six.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
there's definitely a relationship there. That exploitation was exactly what I was thinking of. It's exactly what it's going for. And there's this notion that like the source of the magic, in this case, the Espers, is something you're supposed to have some respect for. It's like they're like the land of the Fae, right? Basically, is what they are. At least that's my impression. And so there's this notion like that's kind of tied into nature forces, and you need to respect that. And then when you exploit it for your own gain without respecting it and just destroy it as you go, like you cause a lot of problems. And seven, of course, digs into that much further. But the notion of magic having been gone and coming back is, I think, kind of an interesting one in terms of comparing like different fantasy epics. Like, I remember there was an interview where Brandon Sanderson pointed this out. I thought it was super interesting, where he was commenting that in a lot of fantasy epics, there's this notion that magic's going away. Like, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think like Lord of the Rings is kind of doing that toward the end, like because the elves are leaving. And but like there's an interesting like reverse exploration where it's like when magic's been gone for a while and it's coming back, like what does that mean? What is the impact of that on the world and how do the characters deal with it? And I think you see a little bit of it here. It's just kind of in that kind of dark thematic way because of the exploitation theme.
And from Kefka's nihilism, I mean, the question is like, why not, right? Like, what there's no natural law, no moral law pressing upon him, and so there's nothing to prevent him from, poisoning the river and killing people, or exploiting, however we're defining the Espers, whether they're people, forces of nature, a little this, little that. Regardless, nature, people, it doesn't really matter because he has no moral law placed upon him. Which, I mean, it's a dangerous position, but also, I mean, it's very much a reality of the world in which we live, right? I mean, we live in a world that is still clinging to, especially in the Western world, right? We're holding on to a world that's clinging to old Christendom, but in many ways, we are living in a post-Christian reality regarding broad-scale institutions. I'd say for the most part, generally speaking. Um, but then people have to deal with the question of like, what do we have now, which is how we get into this postmodern mess, where the best we can come up with is, well, you just embrace something, but whatever you embrace is going to be artificial. But the problem is that can only go but so far. And so, I mean, eventually, the issue of the question of ought kind of fades away, and then the question is, what's wrong with what Kefka's doing? Right? This is just will to power philosophy. Is this not exactly what Nietzsche prescribed? God is dead, therefore create your own values, be your own God. And so it's the Kefka's kind of philosophy is the sort of thing that like everyone looks at that and recognizes he's the villain, like he's the bad guy. But at the same time, on a philosophical level, he's not that different than a lot of contemporary academics.
So are you saying Final Fantasy VI is exploring themes from Abolition of Man then?
I mean, very largely, yes. I mean, I think of it toward the end of That Hideous Strength, where they're talking about how could all these terrible things have happened at Bellbury, and one of them says, nothing happened there that wasn't previously taught by some lecturer at St. Anne's, or at not St. Anne's, at Edgestowe, right? That it starts in the university. And then what we see in Bellbury is the playing out of ideas that no one really expected to be played out. It's all in Lewis.
Oh, yeah, Lewis is very relevant. But yeah,
Right.
the exploration of Kefka is like the postmodern, like self-made deity, I think is actually a very salient point. And then it becomes kind of a question of like, can the story's themes actually accurately argue against that? And I think the characters try, particularly at the end when they confront Kefka and they're like, here's why life is worth living, that sort of thing. But I think it's still coming from like a not particularly well, like spiritually rooted place in how they write it. I don't think it's like badly written at all, but it does feel like they're struggling to define first principles of like why life is worth something and why you shouldn't just destroy everything and be your own god and oppress everybody. But I guess they're trying to argue, like I said, why life is worth something, not like why this specific use of your life is wrong, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean they kind of fall into just a different branch of secular existentialism where it's still we're saying that we our life is meaningful because we choose to treat it as meaningful, that we choose to embrace friendships and love and compassion, all these things, because that seems to us better than what Kefka's doing. But it's very shaky ground because it still comes down to the same sort of exercise of will that Kefka's doing. They're just pointing it in a different direction that most of us would look at and say that's a positive direction, but they're not operating within a worldview that has any objective standard for what positive means. And so it still kind of comes down to the feels, as the kids would say. I don't know if the kids still say that or not, but that's what it comes down to. I mean, a positive reading might be this is a Puddleglum situation of, I'm going to live like a Narnian even if there is no Narnia, right? Like that's, I think, a more positive way of approaching that. But um, I think it's a stretch to identify our characters with Puddleglum.
Yeah, I've seen memes online that are, like I don't treat people well because I'm scared that some God is going to send me to hell. I treat people well because it feels good to not be a jerk. And I'm like, but that's still a self-serving motive, right? You're not treating this person well because they have inherent worth or because there is ultimate objective moral reality. You're still doing it because of what you get out of it. You just think the idea that, there's life after death, you think that's silly. And yeah, I feel like that could be the same sort of a thing here. Like they've got other reasons, but they're still, like you said, Micah, not really rooted in any kind of objectivity.
Yeah, and I think that's a struggle of a lot of fantasy, not just in video games, but like because like fantasy is so obviously trying to deal with really epic themes, right? Of like fundamental matters of good and evil. But like in the modern day, typically these are written without a spiritual root to them. And so it's very, very hard to find like and rebuild from those first principles when you don't have that spiritual root of like what defines the good side here and its argument against this fundamental evil side. And I think Final Fantasy is just one in a long line of fantasy stories that struggles with that.
Yeah, I mean, and this is the problem. Well, I mean, to that specific point regarding fantasy, I mean, Tolkien even says that fantasy is born of allegory. Like people will, whenever allegory comes up, people think that Tolkien just hated all things related to allegory, but that's not at all the case. That he says very clearly, fantasy is born of allegory. Allegory stands for things. Like you don't really have meaningful allegory unless you have a meaningful framework of value, of good and of evil. And so real fantasy, Tolkien says, is directly connected to these sort of allegorical realities, even though fantasy itself is no longer exactly the same thing as allegory, but it's still part of the same family. And so good fantasy, he would say, actually does mean something. And the problem is you have people who don't recognize genuine meaning trying to say something meaningful. which isn't only a problem for fantasy storytellers. I think it's a problem for people trying to live as consistent secularists, which nobody really does because everybody thinks that what they do is meaningful. Otherwise, they wouldn't make the choices that they make, right? But yeah, so but this is a problem I think that is particularly poignant in a genre that is trying to say something.
Yeah, and to be sure, I don't think that means like it doesn't ask useful questions or like explores useful themes. Like one thing like I kind of read into it like is a theme that's important to me is like facing the reality of evil and actually confronting it. And like not just in the sense of like a cosmic battle against good and evil, but like not putting your head in the sand. It's like you have to walk through this pain that Cyan is going through with his family, like with him through all that, for example. And when the world gets destroyed, like the characters all have to ask themselves, is life still actually worth living? Like, is there still hope we can find in this? And it's like this notion of like fighting against not just Cyan, but like Celes has a very memorable moment, like right after the world's destroyed, where like she, if I remember, she tries to kill herself, like she throws herself off a cliff. And that's really hard hitting, like especially in like this little 16-bit pixel game. But it makes you think like when you feel like all hope is lost, like how do you find things to cling to? And obviously from a spiritual Christian rooted point, like it's like we ultimately live for the Lord who is eternal. And so like we can never lose all hope. But obviously the characters here don't have that, but there is this notion of like it is important to look for it because life is intrinsically valuable to hold on to.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like even if I'm not fully satisfied with all the answers, which I wouldn't expect that I would be, they are asking a lot of the right questions, and they're at least beginning to move in a positive direction. Like you said, like it's a positive thing to have all these characters who are not only fighting against Kefka, they're fighting against despair, right? They're fighting against their own inner demons, especially in that second half of the game where you have to go recruit everyone and deal with their various issues that they're dealing with. And so I really do appreciate that kind of existential turn. It's very psychologically oriented, where they have to get outside of themselves and recognize like we still have a purpose to serve. It's not all about me. There's a broader context in which I can find genuine meaning, and that's what I need to press into. And so that I definitely would say is a very positive theme, especially in the second half.
And I did fail to mention, I also think it's interesting we finally have a villain that has some depth because you see Kefka in the opening animation. Like you see him before you're introduced to any of the protagonists. And in a lot of Final Fantasy games, you don't even know the name of the primary antagonist until you're about to fight them at the very end. So it's good to see like, I mean, it doesn't feel like he's the true villain necessarily at the beginning. Like, there's this emperor. So he works for the emperor, but the emperor doesn't really come into the picture a whole lot. But it's better than just having this nebulous, it's evil, trust me, and you need to kill it kind of a thing that a lot of the earlier games had before they really attempted this kind of storytelling.
Yeah, I think that's worth noting that in this one, the villain really sets the theme for like, what the whole story is about as he tries to suck everyone into his despair. Um, so yeah, so he definitely does play, I think, a more compelling role than what we've seen so far of just these random deities sort of thrown at us at the end.
Yeah, I don't know if I ever thought of Kefka as having like much depth per se. He's one of my favorite villains, mind you. But like, do we ever find out like his backstory at all? I don't remember if we ever do. Or is it kind of like just because again, I compare him to like the Joker from Batman, like where the Joker just kind of is, and you don't have like a coherent origin story
Right.
in most cases.
Yeah, I guess by depth, all I really meant was that he has lines and he is in the story and interacting with the characters,
Yeah,
and in
that's
other
true.
ones, yeah. But you're right. He's kind of one note. He is who he is, and we don't. Yeah, we're not made to sympathize with him, thank heavens. If they did a remake, there might be some tragic childhood backstory for him, but not here.
Yeah, he's very clearly like just pure evil from the get-go. Even
Mhm.
though he's not like it's not obvious he's going to become a main villain for a bit. Like You're right. He shows up very early. Like I think his first major scene is when at Sabin's castle, right? When he's coming in with his forces to try to tear it down, and then oh, surprise! The castle's a submarine, and it can go in the sand because
Yeah.
It's Final basically being goofy. But yeah, like he's recurring like his big thing, obviously, where he, this is what you guys mentioned, where he poisons Cyan's town. Like that's where you're like, oh my goodness, this guy sucks. And then he just kind of reiterates, constantly reminds you that he's there up until he just does the unthinkable and destroys everything. But yeah, he's like this really he's like morbidly entertaining and like this force of nature where it's clear this guy's going to be a problem.
But actually a bit cowardly, especially early on. You keep fighting him and he keeps running away. You don't get any experience for it. It's annoying. Um, but yeah, as that's he's still working on his master scheme. So where when you're in the Magitek factory, that where he his plan's going so great, he already calls himself a god at that point.
Yeah, it really does add to his character the fact that he keeps annoyingly running away. It shows that this is, despite the fact that this is a man of a great presence, he doesn't really have any substance. He is a man without a chest, right? Abolition of Man. That he is somebody who doesn't have any real substance, any real standards. All he is, he's somebody grasping. To apparently, I'm all over Lewis right now, but it reminds me of in The Great Divorce, where there's this woman who's just grumbling and grumbling and grumbling, and the George MacDonald character in the story says that, well, at this point, she may not be anything more than just a grumble. Like that's just what she has become now. So too, Kefka, he is like a, I don't know, he's a grasper, right? He's just, all he does is he grasps for power. But he never really has it. I mean, even when he has the power to sort of assert himself, when he becomes a god and takes the magic into himself, like even then, he doesn't really have power because like there's nothing for him to achieve. And so, in a more Boethian sense, like in a more classical philosophical sense, he doesn't have the power because he can't do anything because he lives in a vacuum. Um, and so, from the beginning to end, he is a shell of a man.
Yeah, and one thing I remember struck me last time, I guess last time I played through it, was like, although Kefka's very present, like up until he destroys the world, like for the whole like last act where you're in the world of ruin, like even though like he's obviously still the main villain, he's surprisingly not active at that point. Like you see him blow up a town at one point, I think, but and you know like oh, there's all these minions he's got running around, like all these different demons, but like you don't actually interact with him again until like you climb the tower and confront him for the final boss fight. So I feel like that almost fits in the theme, like you were saying too, where it's like, well, he achieved as far as he could go, and now he's like, well, my life's empty now, so I'm just gonna sit here and wait while everybody struggles until they get there and they have like an argument, and he tells everybody they're sounding like a self-help book.
Yeah, in many ways, in when you get to the world of ruin, at that point, until you get to the end, I mean, Kefka, he doesn't really seem like the main antagonist. The main antagonist is themselves, like the various characters, right? So it becomes much more a psychological adventure until the end when you do kind of break out of that and confront Kefka himself.
So once they've all dealt with their own demons, so to speak, then they're equipped to actually fight the villain. I again, I don't remember a lot. I remember just a few things from the first time I played it. I definitely remembered the opera scene because that was so unlike anything that had ever happened on Super Nintendo before, and it was really tense because you're like, I got to get all the lines right, or I'll have to do all this again. And I remember that there was a cataclysm, and I remembered the final battle and how it's tiered with this giant boss that you're fighting. Um, but yeah, I didn't remember a lot of specific details. So the second half of the game is very side quest heavy, right? Where everybody is having to deal with their own smaller problems for a bit.
Yeah, and I think that's a common thing with like that era of JRPGs. Like Chrono Trigger does the same thing. Like you get to a certain point, and then it's like, all right, here's the final dungeon. It's sitting over here, and at some point you can go to it whenever you get the the airship to go there. But like until then, there's all this other stuff you can go do, and it's probably a good idea for you to go do it in whatever order. So it's like it's pseudo open world for a while. But yeah, the you mentioned the opera scene, like that's what like everybody remembers is like one of the really iconic scenes from that game. Um, and like I remember of all things, I'm remembering when Nintendo Power did their like the old video game magazine did their like top 100 games of all time, and they said we were arguing about whether to put Final Fantasy, well, for them two and three, four and six, which one to go first. And then somebody said Final Fantasy six is the opera scene, and so it won. Like because
That's
it's a
funny.
very memorable moment, and that kind of relates to like one of my favorite things about the game, which is its soundtrack is unbelievably good. Like that's probably my favorite soundtrack, like in the series, maybe in all the video games. Like it's just super ambitious. All the characters have leitmotifs. The final battle you mentioned, like if you look at the soundtrack, it's like a 17-minute long song. It's insane, like because it just goes through all these different stages. It's like I think somebody said it was like Nobuo Uematsu's like Evil Knievel soundtrack, where he was just showing off, like before we went into the fully recorded music era. Though, actually, sorry, I take it back. Final Fantasy VII was still MIDI, but that's getting off topic. But yeah, it's very ambitious. Like they're clearly trying to do a work of art with this game in ways they were not doing in prior games.
That's true. And and as I've been playing through these pixel remasters, I've been periodically going to the settings and switching it back and forth from the arranged version to the original because I was trying to remember how the original sounded. And I've noticed in six, it's much closer to the original in most cases than it is in any of the previous games. Like they took a lot of liberty and sometimes even changed sort of the style of music for the arrangements in some of the earlier ones. But in this one, they kept it pretty true, almost just like you said, an orchestral arrangement of the same music, and it's well done. But for me, Final Fantasy VII has my favorite soundtrack of Final Fantasy games, but that's just a matter of taste.
Yeah, and six is the game I'm really nostalgic about from that series, so that's my soft spot for me too.
Yeah, I appreciate that as dark and intense as this game can get, that there also are some lighthearted elements like that what was it, Ultros or who's
Ah,
the
yeah,
octopus monster?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
And he's wreaking havoc in the opera, and yeah, he's fun.
Right.
yeah, it's funny.
He kind of reminded me a little bit of the role of Gilgamesh in Five, just this comic relief villain that keeps showing up. So I don't know, it's nothing deep or philosophical there, but I find it charming.
Yeah, and I think that's important. Like six, excuse me, and I feel like six honestly understood this a little better than seven. Is I think like it understood it needed levity to make to like balance the extreme darkness the story goes to. Like I mentioned, like you've got the ghost train, which is like this terrifying exploration of death with Cyan losing his family, and then Saban suplexes it just for fun. Yeah, like yeah, all the characters have some goofy moment with them to kind of just balance it out.
Yeah, and I think Cyan, I felt like they used him for a little comic relief a little too soon after he found his family dead in his house. But yeah, that like even before I can't even remember what happened, but I think Saban has something to say in regard to Cyan, and then he joins you. I guess things are happening so fast, he doesn't have time to mourn at that point. But it's still like just he goes in his kids laying in the floor like it's just terrible. I don't know why anybody drank the purple water, but that's just what happened.
Don't drink the purple Kool-Aid. Are there any other specific characters that stand out to you, or any where should we go with this?
Yeah, I was just thinking characters would be a
Yeah.
good exploration. Like we've obviously talked about the villain a lot, but I mean, it does quite a bit of work with all of its characters, except for a couple of throwaways. Like yeah, Terra is like one of the few like heroine female leads in a JRPG from that period. And I think she's pretty solid because she's got this constant struggle of like, do I know, like, am I really a person? Like, what does it mean to be human kind of thing, which also is like going into like her mixed nature. Because like, correct me if I'm wrong, there's like she's the kid of a human and an Esper, right? And
Right.
so she's got that identity struggle. And like she's dealing with depression over that. Like what does it mean to love, that sort of thing. Which is kind of melodramatic, but still, it's like you can kind of understand like where she's coming from there. Um, Locke is Locke is fun. He's got like this, like when you first meet him, he's very insistent. I'm not a thief. I'm a treasure hunter, and that like that line always stuck with me as like really defining his character. It's like he's trying to be noble, like in his life, even though he's kind of a rogue. You have Setzer, who's on the other side. He's just unapologetically like a womanizer, but like he still helps the good guys anyway. Um, like yeah, and there's a the romance between Locke and Celes, which I think is pretty well done, at least up through the opera scene. Um, yeah, there's some fun characters. That's like a small percentage of them. There's a bunch of others.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I consider Terra to really be a foil to Kefka, in that Kefka's concern is how can I absorb, how can I consume? Her struggle is like how can I love? How can I give myself away? How can I have a meaningful relationship that actually makes other people better? And she ultimately finds that in a kind of maternal role with these orphans in the world of ruin. Like that's when where she really discovers love, because now there are these people who like need something that she has, and she's able to provide that for them, that motherly kind of role. And so that's where she finds love. Though of course her struggle is once she finally finds that, then you or Celeste shows up and says, "All right, now we got to go," and she has to forsake that which she found. And so it just adds to the intensity that uh, that she has to surrender the lesser good for the greater. And in so doing, I think she ultimately ends up finding the lesser back. But yeah, that's another intense positive note. And again, I think it does set these two foundational characters really as inverse images of each other.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point that that they're inverse. Because like one thing I was thinking earlier when we were talking about Kafka is like it feels like he's kind of at some point before the story even begins, he's already just cast off his humanity. He doesn't even care about being a human. He just is grasping at something else, and he doesn't really have a coherent sense of what that is, just power and destruction. But Terra, meanwhile, she starts out not feeling like she has a sense of her humanity because it was kind of stripped away from her to begin with because she was brainwashed to start with, remember? They were using her for her magic to do stuff. And then she's struggling with like, how do I want to be human? What does it mean to be human? And she spends the whole story trying to learn that. Like, what is healthy humanity? And so you have kind of that inverse thing where Kefka does not value humanity at all, and she desperately wants it. And so then that makes it more impactful at the end when she's talking against Kefka, like, hey, I've discovered what humanity is, and this is something valuable.
Right. In embracing human potential, she becomes human fully.
There's some characters I vaguely recall that I have not encountered yet. There's like an old man and an artist girl. Is she, and she may be related to him? Is that how that went?
Yeah,
Or am I
Strigo
imagining?
and Realm is who you're
Okay.
thinking of. Who I'll be honest, those are characters that didn't stick out as much to me as others. But yeah, I
Uh,
think they're related.
Isn't that
Not
like
sure.
is it are they grandfather and granddaughter
That
or
sounds right.
I was
It's
counting
either
on you
that or
guys to.
adopted, but I think they're actually related.
Okay. I thought you guys would have this. I was just trying to spark the conversation and then I was going to listen. But yeah, I remember that she would like she had a move where she would paint like an enemy and then it would attack or something like that.
yeah, I didn't really use them very much.
And I remember the one, I guess it was the mime guy you're talking about, like you have to let a specific kind of sandworm swallow you to get him or something like that.
Yeah, the sandworm from Dune swallows you, and then
Yeah.
like you find him in its belly.
Okay.
But he has like no character at all. But he does have a weirdly good music associated with him because again, the soundtrack's crazy good. Like this random mime has some of the best music in the game. Sure, why not?
Yeah, it's kind of fun. You get swallowed by this worm, and then it's like a whole dungeon inside. It reminds me of the other game where you get swallowed by a Leviathan, and there's a whole community living inside of them.
That's right. Uh,
Um, let's see who else. I mean, yeah, Locke is definitely an interesting character. Like you said, the treasure hunter, not the thief. makes you think of like an Indiana Jones situation there. And the whole dynamic with Celeste is pretty intense because he also has this other girl that I can't remember if he somehow he had her die. I don't remember the exact situation. She died on his watch in some way, but he was basically holding out to bring her back to life. Well, at the same
Right.
time, the stuff is happening with Celeste.
So I just played that part a couple days ago. Had his flashback. So yeah, it was a woman he loved, and they went out to look for something, and then she fell. Well, he was going to fall, and she dove to save him, and then she fell, and then she got video game amnesia, which happens in every video game. And then while he was gone, some people came and killed her. But yeah, then for some reason, a guy in that town is keeping her body perfectly preserved, Sleeping Beauty style, even though she's basically dead. So yeah, I don't know. Does that never come of anything else later?
Yeah, so later, through the Phoenix Esper, I believe she gets resurrected for a short time, but there's something wrong with the Magicite, and so she comes up and says, "Look, you have to move on." Bah. That's
Okay.
that's how that ends. So I guess
I-
that
I'm
then frees him up to follow his new romance.
I'm glad I'm glad she chose her words carefully before she disappeared.
That yeah, it would have been an awkward love triangle if she'd come back. My fun random story about the characters of Final Fantasy is like in the Super NES game, at least, you could rename the characters to whatever you wanted when you met them. And I was playing through the game a few years ago with some friends, and so like we just kind of hung out together, just played the game. And we were naming all the characters after people we knew, and we were trying to get all of our close friends in there, but then like at some point we ran out of female characters. And so we ended up naming Umaro the Yeti after one of the girls we do, and she was very unhappy about that when she found that out. So
Oh man.
we jokingly called her a Yeti after that, good-naturedly.
Yeah, I I used to always rename the characters. I just leave them canonical at this point. But like I know there can be some funny results depending on what you rename the characters. I've seen people saying like if you name Link in the Zelda games my dude, you'll have a really chill experience. So everybody just saying welcome my dude and stuff.
Yeah, it's kind of fun that they throw in these seemingly random characters like a Yeti, which doesn't have any character. He just smashes stuff. I don't think you can even control what he does, if that's right. I don't know. I didn't really use him very much.
I saw him peeking out of
He's a
the
berserker.
cave. He's a berserker.
Yeah, he well, that's his
That's his
class
role. Yeah,
archetype is he's a berserker.
Gotcha.
yeah,
So like those tend to be the least interesting characters because you don't make decisions for what they do.
Right. And even Gao, once you pick an enemy for him to emulate, he just automatically does whatever he's going to do for the rest of the fight. But some of the things like Saban's abilities and it's Edgar, right? His brother. Uh, some of his tools, like when if you get the chainsaw and things like that, like they can be really overpowered in certain situations, and they don't really cost anything to use. So it's kind of strange.
yeah. That's why in this huge ensemble of characters, whenever I had the choice, I just had my select few overpowered
Right.
people.
That's why the end
And
game's tough because it forces you to split into teams of
Mhm.
three different teams. And it's like, all right, I gotta start using people I'm not used to because I'm using everybody.
right. And Gao, I find him a little frustrating, but it is interesting. It has a whole area that exists just for him to learn new moves. And, he can even learn the moves. Like he can fire off missiles if you, once you, the Magitek armor, once he emulates it. And don't try to think too hard about it, but it works.
Yeah, he's the blue mage type, which I've always thought felt really strange on him because he's supposed to be like this wild like Jungle Book kid kind of thing where he
Hmm.
grew up in the wild and that's how he knows how to like take monster abilities somehow. But yeah, like when you have monsters that are mechs that shoot missiles, it feels a little weird on him. But yeah, I was trying to think through like other characters. So like Edgar and Sabin, we brought them up. Like they have a whole story of like estranged brothers, right? And Edgar does not come off as like he comes off as a creep when you meet him because he's like hitting on every woman that moves. But and then Saban is completely different. Like he's over there like studying martial arts and like being ascetic away from society. I don't remember how they develop in the late game though.
Yeah, I don't remember. I feel like they more or less maintain their characters. I mean, you get a little bit deeper with some of the backstory flashbacks. And I remember they flipped a coin to see who would be king. And I think it was, if I recall correctly, I don't think either of them really wanted it.
Yeah,
Um,
I think that's right.
so it's more like the loser has to be king because it's just not something either of them really wanted to embrace. And so Edgar takes the throne, but he doesn't seem very kingly. He's like King Johnny Bravo, right? He's just the frat guy who just doesn't really want to be king, even though he does embrace his role, which again goes to this idea of I'm going to embrace the role that is given to me rather than what I might want to do. And so that is, I think, a potential display of virtue there.
I'm gonna remember that line, King Johnny Bravo.
Let's see, who else do we have? I mean, Shadow's kind of fun. You don't really know a whole lot about him, but so I don't know that can philosophize too much. But
He's
I
got the
always
coolest
enjoyed him.
dog ever though.
He does.
Just randomly, dog's name's Interceptor. Sometimes he'll just run into battle, like bark and attack the enemy. It's like, it's great. Good dog.
Yeah, I've pulled up a list of the playable characters to see if there's anyone we've forgotten about. Yeah, Go-Go
Go,
is
go. That's his name, the
he's
mime.
the mime guy, yeah. And I feel like I went to an island and went to a town where no one will talk to me. They're all just like, I've never seen you before, and the shopkeepers won't do anything for me. And I feel like Strago is standing there, but he just says the same thing. So I was like, okay, I'm not supposed to meet him yet. But he is a blue mage. Uh, so he actually does learn just magic abilities from the enemies, I guess.
Am I misremembering? Is he the blue mage and not Gal? Or
Well,
are
I
they just
mean,
different types of blue
the
mages?
principle is basically the same, but I think he actually learns specific moves, I guess. But
Right. I think he's the proper blue mage, where Gao is more or less the same thing, but
Gotcha.
yeah.
Yeah, I was misremembering.
yeah, and Realm is his granddaughter.
Mhm.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Let's see. And then there's Setzer, right? The airship guy.
Yeah, he's fun.
Yeah, it's a weird introduction to him though, that he's basically trying to abduct a woman and
Mhm.
marry her. And then once you explain to him, look, there's terrible things going on, then he just ditches all that and hangs out with you.
He also has a
Right.
really interesting class type where like his attacks involve playing a slot machine.
I like his card throwing because I loved Gambit in the early 90s from the X-Men.
He is basically Gambit, yeah. Did Mog ever have any meaningful character stuff? I don't remember. I know he's the Geomancer type.
Well, he learned to speak English from Ramu, however you want to say it.
The summon?
Uh, yeah, that's what he says when he meets you, and that he told him he should help you, Capo. And then that's I think that may be about it. I'm not sure.
It's convenient that Galactic Basic is always English.
Hmm.
That's right.
There's some side characters who are interesting, like General Leo. I thought was a cool character up until he got offed by Kefka because he's like the one noble general for the Empire, right? Where he's and then he just has the misfortune of being at odds with Kefka.
And I mean the Cid in this game, does he come into play later? He's in the Magitek factory. He comes running in when all of the Espers turn themselves into magicite for you and is like, "Whoa, what's going on?" And then he rides the elevator with you. Is like, "Man, I really shouldn't have let him tell me. I really shouldn't have done what Kefka wanted me to do. I feel pretty bad about it." And then I don't know if he comes back later or not, but that's
Yeah,
my
no,
only interaction.
in this game, the most memorable thing that happens with Sid is like you remember when I said like Celeste like tries to throw herself off a cliff? Like right before that, Sid is like dying in a hut and like they're on an island again. They're the only two people on that island.
Oh,
And so Celeste is just trying to take care of him. Like it's kind of like it's like to her, it's like caring for like an old man who's dying. And so like you go out to get fish for him at the water and bring them back to him. as food, and there is actually, I think, a way to keep them alive, but you have to be very careful which fish you catch, and it's not super obvious which ones you're supposed to catch
Huh.
because most of them are like poisonous to eat because they're like the water is like messed with them. And so you give him a poison fish, and then you come back to the hut later, and he's dead. And then
Hmm.
after that is when she tries to kill herself. So that's most people's memory of Sid, I think, from that game.
Okay.
After
Well, I
they
mean,
lose.
that's a little poetic in that
Mhm.
he is the one that made her into the Magicite or whatever. Is it Magicite? Warrior in this. Like
Yeah.
she has magic abilities, but they are not like natural magic abilities. They come from she's been infused with the energy of these Espers, is how she gained her abilities.
Yeah, I think Magicite refers to like the crystallized form of the Espers, right?
Right. So it's just
Um,
Magitek. She's a Magitek
yeah,
warrior, I think.
Magitek is the general term in the game for combined magic and technology, which is
Yeah.
kind of a thing that's been adopted in a lot of in the fantasy trope, is that
Hmm.
notion of mixing the two. And it feels like that was kind of like one of the big themes at like the first half, at least, of like we were talking about, like exploitations, like
Yeah.
how do we take magic and how do we break it down into a science so we can use it repeatedly, and then they use it for like war and stuff. So
I will look at my Final Fantasy III complete guide when I get to that part and see if there's a way I can save Sid.
yeah, I know whenever I play through it, now I've to be sure I only played through it like 3 times, which is still 3 times. But yeah, like I remember specifically I got to say I was like, no, I'm keeping this guy alive. He's not dying on my watch. And I think it's like you have to like check. It's either like it says something when you get the fish, or you have to check your inventory every time you catch one to make
Hmm.
sure it's not deadly to eat. But I
Yeah,
don't
there's
think you get any particular rewards other than, hey, he survived. Actually, he might give you an item. I don't remember.
well, I'm not a pragmatist. I want to save everyone that I can. Okay, so
That's always me too. That's why it's so hard. This isn't one of those games, but like in games where there's like a morality system, it's so hard for me to go like bad, or like a Mass Effect, like go renegade, even though I'm trying because I want to see that path. I
right,
can't do these horrible things. I can't push people out of windows.
right.
Like it's like it
Uh,
feels too bad.
yeah, we've talked about how I felt like it's harder to be the bad guy in those kinds of games because you can't tell when you're making the evil choice or when you're just turning down a mission or just being rude and cutting off relationships and things like that. So it's easier to always just be the people pleaser and like, oh, yes, I'll do all that for you. Oh, no, don't pay me for that. Everything's fine. But yeah, being the bad guy's tougher.
Yeah. Thankfully, Final Fantasy VI is not really one of those games. Like you're pretty much
Right.
on the good side no matter what. It's just like you get those things like, can you keep Sid alive?
Yeah. I
Um,
do I do remember that this was really long for a Super Nintendo game.
it
Like
is.
it took a long time. I think Final Fantasy IV, I think it took me like 24 hours on the game clock to beat it the first time. And then this one, I feel like it got a lot higher for me.
Yeah,
Maybe
I
at
have
least
it in my
15 more.
head. Yeah, I have it in my head from when I last played them both. So like Chrono Trigger is about 20 hours, I think.
Yeah.
Final Fantasy IV, I think, is also about that much. And I think if Final Fantasy VI is taking about 40 hours.
Hmm.
Granted, I like to do everything,
Me too.
so
Yeah.
it doesn't necessarily have to take 40 hours. I'm the guy who, at the very end, there's this little like patch of land you can go to in the world of Ruin where you can fight these like dinosaurs that are super powerful and they cast like black hole at you, but they will rarely drop like this relic that I can't remember the name of, but it will might be the economizer. Like it reduces all of your spells to 1 MP, even like Ultima.
Oh.
So I will go farm those so I could put them on all my mages before I go to the final battle,
Yeah.
which is way more powerful than you need to be. Like when you can cast Ultimate every turn, you're just gonna mow down everything in that final dungeon. Like
Yeah.
Kefka is one of the easier final bosses because by the time you get to him, you're usually like friggin' powerful.
Yeah.
Because the game makes it very easy to like break your characters and make them extremely
But it is
powerful.
fun how they invented a way like, okay, we overstuffed this game with playable characters. how can we let you use them all when you get to the end so that they're not just kind of forgotten. And I think that's pretty cleverly done.
Yeah, the different team dynamic I think was a cool one that they
Mhm.
played around with. And it really makes it feel like an event when you tackle the final dungeon, just because everybody's involved
Yeah.
and they're all going on their different branches.
I'd forgotten about kind of the first person perspective sort of aspects of this, going through the
Oh
mine
yeah.
or when you have the bathysphere and you're going under the water and you pick directions.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's pretty clever. And I think, well, there's a whole sequence where it just kind of shows you when you're trying to get out of the Magitek factory at the end, like you're riding on a thing and you keep getting in fights and it culminates in a boss fight. But I don't think you have any directional choices to make there. But that was pretty clever. And then, so they had to kind of simulate 3D on the Super Nintendo, but then in the Pixel remaster, I think they actually just did some 3D stuff. The opera scene actually has it looks more like Octopath Traveler or something in the Pixel remaster, and the singing is all actually sung. You see the words on the screen, but someone is singing them in English uh, exactly as it's printed. And I noticed that the translation, because I remembered some of the words, they were different from the Super Nintendo version of the song. Like it was a totally different translation of it.
Yeah, I know they retranslated it. I know at least with the Game Boy Advance game they retranslated. I don't know if they're using the same one for the Pixel remaster, but
Yeah, my friend seems to think that they're using the Game Boy Advance translation here. Uh, because he was saying like some of the lines, like when you meet Shadow the first time, Edgar or somebody says he'd slit his mom's throat for a nickel or something in the original
Mhm.
Super Nintendo version, and it's a little different. Like he'd kill a friend for the right amount or something, which maybe you know Super Nintendo localizations were often pretty fast and loose, just to try and make them more fun for the American audience, or so they thought. So I'm
Yeah,
sure the later one's probably more accurate, but
yeah, I have lots of opinions about localization. We could go on a whole ton of tangents on that, but like the short thing for Final Fantasy VI is like originally it was a guy named Ted Woolsey who I think worked for Square at the time. He did a lot of the Super NES RPGs back then. And so he translated Final Fantasy VI. And so you have some of the weird quirky things because localization was a little more fast and loose in that time. Because they had more of this notion of like we need to make things more like relate more to a Western audience. So we had what people jokingly called Woolseyisms because that's what he came up with
right.
that were in this game. Like the one I always remember is like after like early on that scene with Kefka after the Edgar's castle like sinks into the desert. He says, "Son of a submariner." It's like some ridiculous line. Like my favorite line that I'm kind of sad that I think they dropped later was there was there's a couple of spots where like there's lines where people will kind of sputter and it'll like have like repeat something a whole bunch like it'll scroll down the text box
Mhm.
like at when Terra first uses magic somebody says this was magic someone says magic it just like has a whole bunch of m's but like my one of my favorite lines is when later on when Kefka's just freaking out like I think on the floating island um like he's either I don't remember who he's talking to. It's either the Emperor or like you, the characters, because you did something that made him mad. And he says like I hate you, and like the amount of hates that he says is insane. Like it just kind of keeps scrolling down the text box. I
Mhm.
don't think they have that in the later ones, and it's just like it's a really memorable moment because it's like okay, I guess he really hates me now because it's like really like making me feel that. But yeah, later translations, I think they tried to go a little more literal, and get rid of like the overly dated, like goofy stuff that just had no relationship to the original localization. Um,
Yeah,
and there's whole debates that have gone on forever about like how literal versus like local, like ways of speaking should you be in your localizations.
right.
So,
Like it's not scripture, but
right.
there are ways in which, and I don't want to say anything that's derogatory towards Japanese, but English oftentimes has more words for the same thing than Japanese does. They they are a sound poor language. They don't have as many sounds in their vocabulary as English does. So I think it's one of the reasons that English has become kind of the universal sort of a language of business and things like that. But
Mhm.
so maybe they thought, well, we can be a little more colorful in the English than the original Japanese was. But
Yeah, I think one of the crazier localizations I've ever seen was like for Earthbound. Very different game. It's obviously a slight tangent, but like
yeah,
or Mother 2 as it was in Japan. But like I know when they brought it over to the West, like they changed a ton of references and like they changed graphics of the game. So like some of the graphics were referencing like obscure like Japanese like folklore stuff and they changed
right.
it to completely different stuff. Like I think something became a pencil that was like a ghost or
Yes,
something in the
it was
original.
a pun that I think they just couldn't translate. So
Mhm.
yeah, you had to find a pencil eraser, and it was an item that would erase the pencils that were in the way.
Mhm.
And later on, you found an eraser because there were erasers in the way. But yeah, like you said, that's the wrong game.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, that is a tangent. But yeah, if anybody hasn't heard from noted they haven't heard from Andrew in a while, he had to step away, so it's been just me and David
yeah,
talking about Final Fantasy 6. But I don't know. Is there anything else about Final Fantasy 6 we wanted to discuss?
I don't know. I'm looking forward to finishing it. And again, I'm
Mhm.
sorry I didn't get it finished before we had this conversation. But yeah, it's really good. I don't know why I never came back to it. I think it was because I just remembered what a time investment it was. And
Mhm.
something like Final Fantasy IV, I could blow through much more quickly without getting lost because it's very linear. And that one always, just because of, like I said in that podcast, the time that came in my life, that one holds a special place for me. But I know this one's really a special one to a lot of people.
Yeah, you can tell this is the era when RPGs were getting gradually longer and longer. Um, like you compare to like when we had our talk on Final Fantasy 1 through 3, like I played through all of Final Fantasy 3, like the pixel remaster of the NES game, like in a week. I think I
Hmm.
was like 15 hours on the game clock, so it was shorter even than Final Fantasy 4.
Yeah,
But because they were trying to get more cinematic at this point and get more drawn out, more artistically presented stories, more epic, like they just kind of got longer and longer and longer. And then you hit the PlayStation era, and suddenly you could do cutscenes that were more than just like little pixel characters talking to each other, and you had more space to like on the actual medium on CDs to actually write lots of text.
right.
And so they just got longer and longer and longer until we got to the current era where we have 100 to 2 hour, 100-hour JRPGs, and like that's just like all of them, it feels like.
Yeah.
Um,
And I'm often I prefer a shorter experience because a lot of these do feels like there's padding that is just not respecting your time. But I remember when, yeah, Final Fantasy VII, I did all the stuff in that. I did all of the chocobo breeding to get the golden chocobo to go get Knights of the Round and all that stuff. And I think I had probably 75 hours on the clock the first time I finished that, which was really long for the time.
Yeah, I do feel like even though Final Fantasy 6 is longer than the ones before it, it does still feel to me like it moves very fast.
Yeah.
Like it's long not because the game is paced slow, it's long
Mhm.
because there's a lot of content.
Right.
Like there are so many story events. Like it felt like in some ways it feels like the big last big hurrah of the 16-bit era in terms of like big JRPGs. I don't think it was like the last of Square's. I want to say their last one was Super Mario RPG of all things, which had a massive jump in like graphics over this one because that was when they were experimenting with CG,
Yeah. Pre-rendered. Yeah.
which Final Fantasy VII was where it kind of came to full fruition of what they wanted out of that technology.
Hmm.
They weren't yet experimenting with that with six, but they were trying to do the much more larger. It feels like the style of game they were making was straining at the edges of what that era of video game consoles could do. Like they wanted like movie level experience in a video game. And the Super NES couldn't quite do it, but they gave it their hardest possible try
Yeah.
with six.
Yeah. Well, how are we going to wrap this up without Andrew here?
That is the next question. We don't have him here to kind of guide us. I guess it's kind of like what's our like closing takes on the game. And I
Yeah,
guess like you can go ahead, yeah.
I think I gave mine pretty much.
Yeah, I'll just say like I think like there's a reason this is probably my favorite game in the series. Like not just nostalgia, that though that's hard to extricate my nostalgia from an
Right.
objective analysis. But I do really think like this is about as good you can do of like good storytelling from the era that it was made, like with the technology that they had, in terms of getting as cinematic an experience as you could. The writing, I think, is really solid. There's shortcomings, like as we established, that I feel like because, like, obviously, as Christians, we believe like ours is like the most coherent worldview, right? So, like, it's always going to feel a little unsatisfying to us when it feels like something's not well rooted in like an understanding of God and his eternal nature and like how that impacts our view of morality and everything. And so when a story can't appeal to that and it's trying to confront, here's why nihilism is bad, like it feels inadequate to us. But that said, it still asks useful questions. It's like, hey, life is worth like exploring, like explore the value of life. Like there's something intrinsically good about it, which is something that is scriptural, that teaches like that life, because it's made in God's image, has value. And it may be missing like the God's image part here in Final Fantasy VI's story, but it still understands like that life is valuable and worth clinging to, and like it's worth fighting against death, right? And when it seems like everything around you is hopeless, kind of like what the Puddle Glum reference, like that Andrew made, like even when it looks like there is nothing worthwhile out there, like it's important that we trust that there is, and to go seek out that which is valuable.
Hmm.
And I think that's like that goes to a very fundamental aspect of human nature, that like we all need that sense of hope. That's why I'm a Christian in the first place, right? It's because like I cling to that hope.
Right. Yeah, it's good.
Well, shall we close it out on that then?
I guess so. All right.
All right. We'll talk to you later, David.
Later.
It's fun.
Thank you for listening, and if you enjoyed these conversations, as well as maybe you've enjoyed some of the deep dive stuff I've been doing with the Elder Scrolls and philosophy, maybe you like the main Mythic Mind podcast, maybe you like the stuff we're doing with the movies and shows podcast. If you like any or all of that and you want to see more of that happening, then I welcome your support over on Patreon at patreon.com/mythicmind. That's going to allow me to do more things like this. Also, it'll give you the opportunity to join these conversations if you so desire. I would love to do a lot more of the deep dive, whatever, and philosophy studies. I think the next one I'm probably going to do at some point in 2026 is on Fallout. But I can only do more of that with additional support that allows me to turn my attention away from other things that pay the bills. So again, if you want to support our work, you want to join the conversations, patreon.com/mythicmind. Or if you just want to keep listening on the freebie feeds, then make sure you're subbed here, make sure you're subbed to the main Mythic Mind podcast, make sure you're subbed to Mythic Mind movies and shows. And if you're listening to this on the public feed, then the next thing to come out from Mythic Mind will either be over on the main Mythic Mind podcast as we really get into the first 3 Narnia books, or I might post something from the Elder Scrolls course over here a little bit earlier than that. We'll see. I'm just kind of throwing that stuff in here and there. So keep an eye for that, and make sure that you're subbed to my YouTube channel as well. You can find a link to that in the show notes. All right. Well, thanks for joining us again. Next time over here, we're going to be starting in on a Fallout series, and so I'm really looking forward to that. But that's it for now. Until next time, Godspeed.